I had events happen to me this week that brought on this subject. I thought I would introduce it with a little history. In the month of August 1914, which was way before my time, I'll have you know, Ernest Shackleton launched an Antarctic expedition. It was his third such attempt. His goal was to cross the Antarctic continent from sea to sea via the South Pole, something that had never been done. His team consisted of 27 men. The name of his ship was the Endurance. Their ship became locked in the ice on January 1915, about 6 months after 5-6 months after they had launched. And 10 months later, the sea ice crushed the ship, so they were stuck there they'd been gone from home a year and 4 months when the ship was crushed by the ice and it sank. So the crew began camping on the ice floes. They had to move from place to place as the ice moved around. Then they saw some open leads and they launched their lifeboats, of which they had 3, about 20 feet long lifeboats. And they made it to Elephant Island, which is a little further north, where there was open water. And from there, Shackleton and 5 men launched a modified lifeboat and sailed for 17 days over 800 miles and made it to the island of South Georgia through very tempestuous weather. From there, a rescue voyage was launched to Elephant Island. The crew was recovered, and it was a happy ending to a very desperate situation. During that time, the crew had no way to communicate with the outside world. They knew where they were, but they had no way to tell anyone else. To their families, they had gone missing and were lost. Here's a picture of when they launched the 20-foot lifeboat that had been modified. They'd taken remains of the ship and built a covering over the hull so that they could go in. They had to take turns going under the cover to stay alive. 17 days, over 800 miles they rode in that boat. It has been estimated that more than 3 million ships lie on the bottom of the oceans of this planet. Most will remain lost forever. But most of the stories do not have a happy ending. About 2 years ago, some industrious explorers found the hull of the Endurance. It's at a depth of 10,000 feet in the Weddell Sea. Nobody went down there in person, but they sent, I was going to say extraterrestrial, but they sent down submersible machines with lights and cameras. And it's amazing that the hull, though it was crushed by the ice, has still remained somewhat intact. And I don't think anybody plans to raise the hull. It would be quite a project, and for what purpose? So, a story of being lost and missing and being found. And that's kind of the theme of my remarks today. About 12 years ago, 2012, when Linda and I were running a flying business in Northwest Alaska. I've told this story before, but I thought it was good enough to tell again. We got a request for a flight in the early fall. The people who requested the flight hoped against hope that it would be successful in finding a lost and missing person. The person was reputed to be a survival expert who came to Alaska to, quote, find himself. And that has happened more than once. He made arrangements to stay in a local cabin on the Ambler River, about 30 miles up from the village of Ambler. It was a cabin which was quite a good place to spend winter. And he made arrangements. He said, I'll hike over to the nearest village by a certain date. When that date came and went, he was reported as missing. The Alaska State Troopers were notified, and a search was initiated. By the time we got involved, more than a week, maybe 10 days had gone by. And ice was forming on the rivers and creeks and lakes. The man's wife came up from Wisconsin, where they had been living, and she recruited the services of Arctic author and expert Seth Kantner to ride along. And we had a whole airplane load of people. And we flew up and down the ridges and creeks and rivers of that neighborhood, which is a very primitive area of the Brooks Range. Hoping to see something that would be a clue to find the missing person. And then it snowed. The snow that covers and obscures everything. I hate to end it so solemnly, but that person has never showed up. In the years since then, whenever I've flown in that area, I've looked to see if there's something that could be seen. And something might turn up, you never know. The definitions of lostness are the state of being lost. Now that seems pretty profound. Unable to find one's way, yeah, okay. Confused, bewildered, or helpless. No longer known. All these are touch on the meaning of lostness or being lost. There are some biblical stories regarding being lost. I think of the axe head told in, I think it's 2 King, well it says right there, 2 Kings 6, where the residents of the school of the prophets said, our house where we stay is too small. We need to build a bigger one. Everybody take an axe and we'll go down by the river and cut some trees and make logs and build our house bigger. And Elisha said, I'll go along. So they went along, and as they were cutting trees, a young man apparently had the axe head come off his wooden handle. I've had that happen. Usually if you put them in water the night before, the wood swells up and the head doesn't get quite as loose. Anyway, the young man was distraught. He said to the prophet, I've lost the axe head. And behold, it was borrowed. That's worse. Iron objects were hard to come by in that time of Israel's history. Elisha's response to the loss of the axe head demonstrates God's interest in the ups and downs of our existence. So Elisha said, cut a little piece of wood, throw it in the place where the axe head disappeared. And when they did, the axe head floated up, and the young man picked it up and happily returned it to the owner, I hope. Jesus told some stories about lostness. Luke 15 tells that the kingdom of God invests its resources in the one sheep that is lost and rejoices greatly when that one is found. You're all familiar with the story. 100 sheep, one is missing. The shepherd leaves the 99 and goes looking for the one. We could wonder, why does he care that much about sheep? They're kind of stupid anyway. But then I remember that the story is about me, about us. We are the sheep. And it's heartening that heaven cares so much about each one of us, that if we were the only one that was lost, Jesus would have come for us. Then Jesus went on to the second story The story of the lady who lost a coin. It may have been part of her dowry, which she hoped to pass on to her daughter. Very important. The difference between the sheep and the coin is that the coin does not know it is lost. It is inanimate. The coin represents those that do not recognize their true condition. And the coin is lost at home. It's possible to be lost at home or lost in the church, close by. In Jesus' summation of this parable, he says there's joy in the presence of the angels when one sinner repents and comes back. Then we get to the story of the prodigal son, which is probably the most popular subject for preaching anywhere in the world. We love the story. It's our story. But when the son finally comes back home in his tattered rags, homeless, moneyless, penniless, and he's welcomed by his father, he's surprised. But when the unforgiving older brother has a meltdown at the welcome home party for his little brother, the father in Jesus' words says, it was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. Luke 15:32. God reserves a special love for those who are lost and missing. He calls on his disciples, that's us, to ask for that kind of love as well. I think that kind of love isn't normally found in my heart. I need the gift of God to find it, to have it. Okay, now we're going to go to my personal tale. Last Sabbath, I was in Cortez, Colorado. That's southwest Colorado. I'd never been in that country before. I was requested to go there to do a special repair on an airplane. I don't know why they had to ask somebody from Alaska to go that far, but I thought, well, I'd like to see southwest Colorado. Maybe I can do something to help. And I still have not met the owner of the airplane. He was not in town when I was there. To my knowledge, I've never met him. But somehow he got my name from somebody. Anyway, I arrived a week ago Thursday, and by Friday I was probably more than 50% done with the job. And I told the flying service where the airplane was, I said, well, Saturday is my church day. I plan to go check out the Adventist church in your town. And he said, okay, well enough. And they loaned me the airport courtesy car to go. So I got up Sabbath morning, and as usual, I got there early, almost too early. Well, nobody asked me to teach the lesson or anything, which was good. So I went to church and had a good Sabbath school discussion and a stimulating sermon, and was greeted by many friendly people, none of which I had ever met before. One guy after church said, well, I've been to Alaska. And I said, okay, where'd you go? He said, to this little place that you probably never heard of. And I said, try me. He said, Ecock Beach around Dillingham. And I said, yeah, that's where my relatives all fish. I've been there many times. So after church, I went back to my hotel and ate lunch. And I won't tell you what I had. Then I decided to go to the Four Corners area, which was very close by. I thought, well, it'd be kind of neat to see where New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado all come together in one spot. So I went out to get in my borrowed car, but I had my hands full with clothes and gloves, and then I had forgotten the keys to the car, so I couldn't open it. And I thought, well, where can I lay something down so I don't have to carry all this stuff back into the hotel? So I laid my iPad on the trunk lid of the car. There was a little fin back there that you could sit against, and I hurried into the hotel and came back out. Anyway, this is a picture of southwest Colorado. On a good day, you can see 150 miles. And that's where I set my iPad. But I forgot that it was there when I went out to get in the car. And the next time I thought of my iPad was when I was about halfway to Four Corners. So I stopped to take a picture. This very picture of that standing pillar of rock. Well, that's kind of cool. A great, huge thing. And then I thought, my iPad would take a better picture. I wonder where it is. Of course, I looked on the trunk lid, and guess what? It wasn't there. So that changed my whole focus. As I thought about this situation, I imagined the iPad falling off the car in the busy traffic. Highway 160 is a very busy road with big trucks and 2-lane, 65 miles an hour, narrow shoulders. So I retraced my route to the hotel. No sightings at all. Then I remembered that my telephone has an app on it that says, find my whatever device. So I thought, I'll try that. So I tuned that up, and it said that my iPad was in this circle that was 5 or 10 miles radius. And I thought, well, that doesn't help. So I parked the car along the highway, and I walked between the traffic and the ditch looking. I thought, this is fruitless. So I kind of gave up and went back to my room to grieve my loss. They say like a needle in a haystack. That's what it felt like. That evening I checked the app again. It gave a precise location of 16 miles south of town. But I have to admit, I was a person of little faith. When you consider something like that falling off a car in that kind of traffic. But yet the fact that it had a signal was some help, But I had pretty well given up by the time I went to bed. But I talked to Linda on the phone. Linda, that one back there. And she said, well, are you going to look again in the morning? And I thought, well, am I? By morning time, I thought, yeah, I should. I should take the time. So I decided I would go by the odometer in the car. Are you bored of this story? Should I finish? So I decided I would go 20 miles south, look at the app on my phone, and see what it said. So at 20 miles, I found a place to pull off, and I pulled off, and it said I'd gone 2 miles too far. Okay. So I turned around and went back up the road. As I got closer, it counted down 1 mile, 0.9, 0.8, 0.5, 0.43. And finally, about 0.1, I found a place where I could get off the road. So I got off the road and checked it again, and it said, you're 80 feet too far north. So I turned the car around. I barely pulled on the highway, and I could see my iPad over on the right side, right up against the guardrail, laying flat. It was open, but upside down. I picked it up and didn't even have a cracked screen. And when I touched the screen, it lighted up, almost as if to say, thanks, it's nice to be found. So this all reminds me of the biblical stories of lostness and God's provision for the lost. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Ultimately, I've learned that the regrets one may experience when we have misplaced something important are nothing compared to the regrets of those who trade their souls for this world's pleasures will experience on that day when Christ comes with his reward with him. So what have I learned from this experience? I've learned not to place valuable things in places that are unsafe. And I've learned that God cares even for the foolish people, of which I have been one from time to time. God has promised that if there was only one lost sinner, Christ would have come and died for that one. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Well, folks, that's the sermon today. And